She pulled her sleeve down fast, dropping her gaze to the floor. It's nothing. I just caught my arm on the cabinet door yesterday while cleaning. Clara, I said quietly, keeping my tone as soft as I could. She couldn't look me in the eye. Dad, please. That single word, please. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't annoyed. It was terrified. And right then and there, the world stopped moving. I didn't know every single detail of what was happening behind their locked doors, but I knew enough to make my blood turn to ice. Later that evening, long after the house was empty and the grill had gone cold, I sat alone in my workshop out in the barn. Copper was curled up on his rug by my feet, his ear twitching against the quiet rhythm of rain tapping on the metal roof. I walked over to the corner, reached under my workbench, and pulled out an old, heavy wooden locker I hadn't opened in years. Inside lay the physical remnants of a past life I had carefully put away. Stacks of yellowed photographs of young men who never got the chance to grow gray hair, service commendations, a folded flag, and one laminated, wallet-sized card containing emergency contact protocols. When Clara was 16 and first learning to drive, I sat her down and taught her basic operational safety. Nothing extreme or overly complex, just practical safeguards. I taught her that if she ever found herself in a situation where she was trapped, unsafe, or couldn't speak freely on a phone line, she could send a specific, innocent-looking text phrase to my number. We called it our distress code. Back then, she rolled her eyes and laughed at me. Dad, you treat everyday life like a movie set. Maybe I did. Or maybe a father who has seen the dark corners of human nature simply knows what people are capable of, even when his children want to believe the best in everyone. I made her memorize one non-negotiable rule. If that code ever shows up on my screen, I don't ask questions, I don't wait for clarification, and I don't delay. I come straight to you. It was just past midnight when my phone vibrated against the wooden bench. A single text message from Clara. Dad, do you still have Mom's recipe for peach cobbler? Beneath that line was a single string of numbers, 418. My chest went dead cold. 418 was our code for immediate, active physical threat. Call authorities and move instantly. I stared at the illuminated screen for maybe 2 seconds. In an instant, the gentle, quiet old man who fixed lawnmowers dropped away, and 27 years of hard-wired instinct flooded back into my veins. Calm, lethal focus took over. I walked deliberately over to the gun safe in the corner, punched in the combination, and opened the door. Not out of a desire for vengeance, but because my daughter was in danger. And a father's protective instinct, once fully awakened, is a ruthless thing. There is a common misconception about fear as a person ages. Younger men tend to assume fear is always a loud, chaotic emotion, racing pulse, sweating palms, shallow breathing, and reckless energy. But real fear, the cold, absolute reality that hits you when someone you brought into this world is facing harm, is completely silent. It strips away all unnecessary noise and leaves behind nothing but pure, tactical clarity. That was the exact state I was in as I drove through the storm toward Clara's house that night. The windshield wipers were slamming back and forth, fighting off sheets of heavy summer rain, while my high beams cut through the blackness of the county road. My old Ford rattled violently every time the tires hit a deep puddle, but my hands were completely steady on the wheel. I had my phone mounted on the dashboard, running on speaker with the county emergency dispatcher. The young woman on the line sounded hurried, her voice crackling through the truck cabin. Sir, I need you to stay on the line. Can you describe the nature of the emergency at the residence? Domestic assault in progress, I said, keeping my voice level and low. Female victim inside the home. Male subject is heavily intoxicated and aggressive. Do you have reason to believe weapons are present in the house? Unknown, I replied. Sir, are you currently approaching the residence? I am pulling onto her street now. Sir, I need you to pull over and wait for responding officers. Deputies are dispatched and currently en route to your location. I looked ahead at the dimly lit street, the rain blurring the streetlights into broad red streaks. No, I said softly. I won't be doing that. There was a sudden pause on the line. Sir, are you armed? There is a licensed firearm locked in my vehicle console, I answered directly. I have no intention of drawing it unless life is directly threatened. That wasn't a bluff, it was a promise. People who don't know any better often assume men with my background are eager for conflict, looking for any excuse to throw a punch or pull a trigger. The reality is the exact opposite. Those of us who have lived through real violence spend the rest of our natural lives trying to keep it far away from our doors. Sir, the dispatcher pressed, her tone tightening. Units are 4 minutes out. Please do not enter the structure. 4 minutes is a lifetime, I said, and ended the call before she could offer another argument. Clara's neighborhood was one of those newer suburban developments built right near the edge of town. Identical brick houses, manicured lawns, and wide concrete driveways. The street was completely quiet, illuminated only by the faint glow of decorative porch lamps flickering through the downpour. I parked my truck 3 doors down, leaving the engine idling quietly in the dark. All the main lights on the ground floor of Clara's house were blazing. Even from across the lawn, over the sound of the rain beating against the pavement, I could hear Marcus shouting. I crossed the wet grass without making a sound. Age definitely takes its physical toll. My left knee throbbed from the damp cold, and my lower back was stiff from the drive. But body mechanics under stress are built on muscle memory. You don't lose the ability to move with intention, awareness, foot placement, momentum. As I reached the side window near the front entryway, I looked through the glass, and the worst nightmare I had carried for years played out right before my eyes. Clara was backed against the kitchen island, clutching a torn dish towel to her face while tears streamed down her cheeks. The left side of her lip was split and swollen. Marcus was standing barely 6 inches from her, red-faced, screaming at the top of his lungs, his arms swinging wildly. Shattered porcelain from a broken platter covered the tile around their feet. He lunged forward and grabbed her upper arm violently, dragging her off balance. A strange thing happened inside my mind in that exact microsecond. Everything went dead still. No surge of blinding rage, no trembling hands. Anger is an emotional distraction, and distraction gets people hurt. This was purely operational. It was the same feeling I had decades ago when approaching a high-risk entry. A complete, icy detachment focused entirely on neutralizing a threat to human life. I stepped around to the side of the house, toward the screened patio. The sliding glass door leading into the dining area was unlatched, resting an inch open to let the damp breeze in. I slipped through the gap without a sound. My work boots didn't make a single noise on the area rug as I moved across the floor. Marcus was still roaring. His voice echoed off the kitchen cabinets. You think your old man is going to come rescue you? You think anybody gives a damn about your crying? Clara tried to pull her arm back, her voice breaking. Marcus, please, just let me go. He shoved her back against the island counter. It wasn't enough to knock her to the floor, but it was designed to break her spirit, to keep her terrified. That was the absolute limit. I stepped out from the hallway shadow directly into the kitchen. No loud warning, no theatrical yelling, no threats. Just steady forward movement. Marcus didn't even realize I was in the room until Clara's eyes shifted past his shoulder. Her mouth dropped open, a tiny, gasping sound escaping her throat. Dad. Marcus turned around slowly, a drunken, arrogant smirk instantly spreading across his face. He actually grinned at me. Well, look at that, he slurred, swaying slightly on his feet. The old quiet man came to play hero. I kept my distance tight, stepping directly into his personal space before he could set his stance. Step away from my daughter. He let out a harsh laugh. Or what, Art? You gonna hit me? You gonna write me a stern letter? I kept my eyes locked on his. Step away from her now. Marcus shook his head, his face twisting into pure malice. You know what your problem is, old man? You sit around acting like some kind of tough guy, but you're nothing. You're just a broken-down old widower living in a barn. Clara moved into my spare bedroom upstairs. It was the same room she grew up in, complete with the oak desk where she used to study and the pale blue quilt her mother had sewn for her 16th birthday. I hadn't changed a single piece of furniture since she moved out years ago. Part of me had always kept that room ready, foolishly hoping she might want to come back and visit more often. I just never imagined she would return under these circumstances. She would sit down at the island table, wrap her hands around a mug of coffee, and look down at the dark liquid without saying a word. I'm sorry, Dad, she whispered one morning, her voice completely hollow. I remembered young soldiers I commanded years ago, sitting in mud-filled trenches, terrified, missing their families. I remembered having to stand on front porches back home, wearing a crisp dress uniform, delivering news that broke mothers' hearts forever. I remembered how I had survived those years by turning off my emotions, building a thick armor around my heart so I wouldn't collapse under the weight of it all. I realized then that I had carried that same tactical armor into my own home. I had used it to protect myself from the pain of losing Martha, but in doing so, I had built a wall that kept my own daughter from coming to me when she was drowning. A soft sound at the door interrupted my thoughts. Clara stepped into the workshop, wrapping her arms against the cool night air. She came over and stood beside my workbench. "Can't sleep?" she asked. I shook my head, just thinking. We listened to the rain tapping rhythmically against the metal roof for a few minutes. Then Clara asked a question she had never asked in her entire life. "Dad, were you ever scared when you were overseas?" I looked at her, seeing the young girl who used to sit on my lap while I carved wooden toys. I gave her a small, honest smile. "Every single day, Clara." She looked genuinely surprised. "But you were infantry. You were a senior officer. Everyone always said you were completely fearless." "Fear doesn't go away just because you put on a uniform or get specialized training," I told her quietly. "Fear is just a human response to danger. Courage isn't about not feeling afraid. It's about doing what needs to be done even when you are terrified out of your mind." Clara looked down at her bruised hands, processing my words. "I was terrified every single day I lived in that house with Marcus," she whispered softly. I reached out, wrapped my large, calloused hand over hers, and squeezed it gently. "And you survived it, Clara. You sent the code. You saved your own life. That makes you braver than any soldier I ever commanded." For the first time in 11 years, my daughter stepped forward, leaned her head against my shoulder, and let her tears fall freely. And I didn't pull away. I held her tight, letting her know that no matter what happened next, she would never have to carry her burdens alone again. The preliminary hearing took place in late October. It was one of those cold, overcast autumn mornings where a biting dampness hangs in the air and settles deep into your bones. I wore my old dark suit, the one I had bought for Martha's funeral years ago. Clara sat beside me on the hard wooden bench outside courtroom 3B, holding a paper cup of warm tea with both hands. She looked remarkably different than she had 2 months ago. Her skin had recovered, her posture was straight, and the vacant, haunted look in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet, steady resolve. Healing doesn't happen all at once, and it certainly isn't neat, but it was happening. When the bailiff opened the doors and we walked into the courtroom, I saw Marcus sitting at the defense table next to his high-priced attorney. He looked strikingly diminished. The tailored suits and slicked-back hair were gone, replaced by a plain gray county jumpsuit. His posture was slumped, dark circles carved deep beneath his eyes from weeks in detention. The arrogance that he wore like a shield had completely vanished, replaced by a bitter, desperate resentment. The moment his eyes locked onto me, his jaw clenched tight. But I didn't offer him a reaction. I didn't glare, I didn't smirk, and I didn't display anger. I simply walked past his table with total composure, helping Clara take her seat behind the prosecution rail. The hearing was swift and decisive. The state prosecutor presented the physical evidence, the officer statements, and the audio recordings Clara had provided. Marcus's attorney attempted to argue for reduced bail, claiming his client was a respected businessman with no prior criminal record who had simply experienced a heated domestic dispute. The judge, a stern, gray-haired woman who had seen every trick in the book, listened to the audio recording through her chamber headphones. When she pulled them off, her expression was like chipped granite. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, her voice echoing clearly through the quiet courtroom. "The evidence presented before this court paints a picture of deliberate, dangerous, and terroristic behavior. Your request for bail is denied. You will remain in custody pending full trial proceedings." As the bailiff stepped forward to handcuff Marcus and lead him out through the side door, he turned his head and glared directly at me, his mouth opening as if he wanted to shout one last bitter insult. I looked him straight in the eyes, unblinking, calm, and entirely unmoved. He saw zero fear in my face, zero doubt, and zero hesitation. He finally realized, in that final fraction of a second, that his dynamic of control was completely broken, and it was never coming back. He dropped his head and walked quietly through the door. We walked out of the courthouse into the bright, crisp afternoon air. The rain had finally cleared, leaving behind a clean blue sky. Clara stopped at the top of the concrete steps, taking a long, deep breath of the cold air, letting it fill her lungs. "It feels like I can finally breathe again, Dad," she said softly, looking up at me. I looked down at my daughter, not the broken, terrified woman who had whispered into a phone 2 months ago, but a strong, resilient survivor who was stepping back into her own life. "You always could, Clara," I told her, my voice thick with a pride I had spent far too many years keeping to myself. "You just needed to remember how." We walked down the steps together toward my old truck. The road ahead of us wasn't going to be completely effortless, and the scars of the past would take time to fade entirely. But as we pulled out into the afternoon light, heading back toward the quiet coast, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The quiet in our lives wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful, real, earned, unbreakable peace.